Hey everyone, I'm the Canadian lad, and I just watched the first episode of Marvel's What If in 0.25x speed, and lads, I must tell you this show looks more promising than anything else on Disney Plus right now. Now hold on a second, I'm not saying this episode was the best, but after watching this, I get the idea why Marvel is doing this. They already said this show is officially canon to the main MCU timeline, so whatever we see in this series is basically taking place in another universe, with the option of crossing over to the main timeline whenever necessary. So what Marvel will essentially do here is experiment with characters, then they will study the fans' reactions, and then bring them over to live-action movies. This way, you'll already know what the fans want, and let it dictate the future of the MCU. This is just brilliant. Now having said that, let's begin our breakdown of What If Episode 1. But first, let me thank today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. What I really like about Raid is all the diverse champions in the game, and boy did they deliver a really cool new character this month, Ninja. Yes, the Ninja has been turned into a brand new legendary champion. Ninja's life was spared by Shadowkin raiders after they laid waste to his family's manor. He would soon become one of the Shadowkin's greatest weapons against the minions of Sephiroth, after being raised and taught the arts of the Shadow and War by the Shadowkins. Now in-game, Ninja wields a katana and a bow and arrow. How cool is that? Ninja's available for free right now as a super limited edition champion, but he's only going to be available until October 15th, so snag him while you can. I can't wait to see how Ninja does in the Doom Tower. Now this month, Raid also added new clan features and improvements, brand new quests, and tons of events and competitions, as well as introducing a clan shop. So if you want to get started in Raid, all you have to do is hit the link in the description or scan the QR code. New players will get the Epic Hero Shinaru for free, 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 engine shard to help summon an awesome champion. You will find the rewards in your inbox for the next 30 days. Now, today's episode opens with a unique intro, but just before that, notice how the usual Marvel intro becomes animated in the last second to incorporate the idea of this series. We get a voiceover by Jeffrey Wright, who's playing the Watcher. He explains to us that the MCU timeline isn't linear, and here we visually get to see what is about to unfold in this series. We see Peggy Carter, Hulk's eyes, Peter Parker, Killmonger, Red Skull, Proxima Midnight, Yondu, Hydra's logo, Loki standing in front of the UN, Thor, Nick Fury, Steve Rogers, T'Challa as Star-Lord, T'Challa's mother, Doctor Strange, Tony Stark, as well as the moment Star-Lord was abducted by Yondu. In the next shot, we see Killmonger as Tony Stark, Stephen Strange before he became Doctor Strange, and lastly Loki and a badass looking collector. No offense, Benicio del Toro is an amazing collector, but I feel this one looks way cooler. Now everything happens exactly the way we've seen in Captain America the First Avenger until this moment.
No, I'd prefer to stay.
This is the moment Agent Carter created a Nexus event. This one tiny decision had a chain reaction, which led to her becoming a super soldier instead of Steve Rogers. Now the movie version had Tommy Lee Jones playing a significant character, Colonel Phillips, but in this one he was killed off almost immediately. But notice we already got a glimpse of him on the right side of the screen when we were being introduced to Dr. Erskine for the first time. Now just like in the movie, a Hydra agent infiltrates and this entire facility is ambushed. Colonel Phillips gets killed and Agent Flynn immediately takes over, becoming Colonel Flynn. Steve Rogers also gets shot but survives, and Howard Stark is more worried about the super soldier program where the machine is losing its power and they must carry out the procedure now or never. So Colonel Flynn commands Steve to get up and get inside the machine, but Steve is badly injured. He then suggests Howard Stark to get under the machine, but Howard says,
"What? Are you crazy? I push the buttons. I'm the buttons guy."
So seeing no other options, Peggy Carter decides to put herself forward and gets the super soldier serum injected into her body. We get the same camera angles and visuals just like we've seen in the first Avengers. Even the reactions of both Steve and Peggy are similar. Now what I love about this is that Marvel used a different background for the scenes in the trailer to avoid spoiling it. It's fascinating to me that Marvel would go this extra mile to protect plot lines, no matter whether it's a live-action trailer or an animated one. Now I cannot ignore just how good the animations are in this series. Notice before becoming a super soldier, Peggy didn't have these chest lines in her body, but after going through the procedure with her increased muscle, they made sure to add these lines on her chest to make her muscle more visible. They didn't animate her body like Hulk, they still kept all the human aesthetics, and Peggy looks amazing as she always did. Now Peggy is constantly being humiliated by Colonel Flynn for taking the serum herself. Peggy says she had no other options but to take it, otherwise they would have lost all of Dr. Erskine's work. Now notice what Colonel Flynn says to Peggy.
And if we get lucky, someday your blood might tell us how to make a real super soldier.
You have a super soldier.
Women aren't soldiers.
Peggy gets insulted just hearing the idea that her blood samples might be used in the future to extract the serum and make another super soldier. I mean, Flynn didn't even say he will definitely do it. He just said it might happen. So imagine what Isaiah Bradley must have gone through when the government kept experimenting on his body in order to create another super soldier. I'm not downplaying Peggy's struggle here. All I'm saying is there will always be some people plotting against you. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. We then get a callback to Steve Rogers destroying this punching bag. They both both literally make the same moves, and then the show foreshadows how Peggy Carter will be able to handle the shield. She complains about Colonel Flynn to Steve Rogers, but he says it could have gotten much worse.
It could be worse. Flynn could stick you on one of those USO tours. Wear a crazy costume, being told to smile 10 times a day.
This is literally what Steve did himself in the main timeline, so Peggy is at least not being forced to act as a puppet. Cut to Tonsberg, Norway, where Red Skull is introduced in the exact same way as he was in the first Avengers. Tonsberg, of course, carries a lot of significance in the MCU, as Odin first fought the Frost Giants right here in Thor 1, and in Ragnarok he died here as well. Then in Endgame we saw how the Asgardians turned this place into their new home. Anyway, so the Red Skull steals the Tesseract, aka Space Stone. Now notice Red Skull hovers his hand over this symbol where a giant creature is surrounding the Tesseract. This was foreshadowing the ending of this episode, where Red Skull uses the Tesseract and a giant creature from another dimension appears, which I think is Shuma Gorath. Now Shuma Gorath is an eldritch monster who inspires fear and horror in all who see him. His first proper appearance was in Marvel Premiere number 9 as a 70s Doctor Strange antagonist. He's the Lord of Chaos, and he's deeply connected to Stephen Strange. And rumor has it that this giant one-eyed tentacle creature might appear in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Cut to the next scene.
It's called the Tesseract.
That thing must be halfway to Berlin by now.
Even though Peggy just said it's called the Tesseract, which is kinda true, but if you translate these runes, it quite literally says Space Stone. So had Howard and Peggy learned some Norse runes, they would have known years ahead that this hypercube isn't just a cube. It contains an actual Infinity Stone. Colonel Flynn then underestimates the Tesseract and says it's just a glorified battery. So Stark and Peggy come up with a new plan. They decide to go after the Tesseract themselves without telling anyone else. Now this box that contains Peggy Carter's suit says Howard's designer clothing on top. And unlike the movie version, this time it is Howard Stark himself who comes up with the shield and gives it to Peggy. Peggy Carter then makes a superhero landing just like Steve Rogers did in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now in this entire fight sequence, I found some amazing attention to detail. You ready? Here we go. If I slow it down to 0.2 Febik speed, notice how accurate the physics are in this scene. For instance, when Peggy flips this truck over, the exact moment she makes physical contact with the truck, it creates a friction, which causes heat, therefore this fire. Another example could be this scene, where Peggy keeps throwing her shield like crazy. Notice how each time the shield hits a Hydra soldier, they either spit or their clothes get destroyed, or their facial expression portrays excruciating pain. And this one is my favorite. Notice how Peggy slams one Hydra soldier with her shield, and the soldier next to him drops his jaw and is like, what the hell am I seeing here? Keep in mind this were all animated, so kudos to all the animators who worked incredibly hard. And I'm here to say your work won't go unnoticed as long as I'm here. And I think it's just better to admit that this version of Peggy Carter is way more brutal than Steve Rogers. Which makes sense though, considering she has been a trained soldier who got enhanced through the super soldier serum, whereas our Steve Rogers was just a skinny kid from Brooklyn. Peggy then captures Arnim Zola along with the Tesseract and brings it back to Howard Stark. Howard then immediately starts harnessing its power to boot up his Mark I suit. So in this timeline, Howard Stark already built Mark I. So just imagine in this timeline what his son Tony Stark will invent in the future. Now I love how Steve was walking with a cane stick, and this is probably why Howard decided to give this suit to him. Captain Carter then proceeds to rescue Bucky. And over here we get another callback to Age of Ultron where Steve Rogers tossed his own bike. But in this one, Peggy not only throws it, she literally kicks it, which I reckon may require more strength to do so. Then we get plenty of references to Captain America: The First Avenger, so without me talking about it, I'll just show you side by side as long as YouTube allows me. Now inside the Hydra Stomper, Steve does have a heads-up display like Tony has in our timeline, but because it's the 1940s, technology hasn't evolved that much yet, so his display mostly consists of dials and how much power he has got left. But still, there's a display in an Iron Man suit in the 1940s, just goes to show how Howard was so much ahead of his time. We then get a montage of Peggy fighting her way into multiple Hydra facilities. At one point, we see Peggy utilizing Steve's flight ability. Notice Howard Stark actually put a handle on the back of the suit so that Peggy has something to hold onto. So Howard literally made it easy for Peggy to ride Steve. Steve and Peggy then share a drink, and Peggy says,
I miss a good whiskey, but the serum doesn't allow me to feel the effects.
Which again fits perfectly with the first Avengers where Steve went through the same thing. Now Steve in this timeline gets a life lesson from Peggy here. He thinks he's still a skinny kid from Brooklyn. The only difference now is he has a suit, but Peggy makes him realize the suit itself doesn't do anything. It's the one controlling it. So if a suit is nothing without the suit, then maybe it's just oh my fucking lord. Cut to the train sequence where Bucky almost falls off, but Peggy saves him.
You almost ripped my arm off!
This of course is a reference to the original timeline where he loses his arm, like multiple times. Steve then dies, or so we are made to believe, because this whole train thing was staged by Red Skull. Now back in the compound, Howard argues with Colonel Flynn and says his Hydra Stomper suit is indestructible. Peggy then interrogates Ernie Zola and finds everything she has to know. She then points to Castle Crake in the map, which according to some of you lads is a reference to the sea monster Kraken. We then get a one-shot scene where Peggy punches her way through Red Skull's fortress and lets everyone else in. Notice how Peggy was blocking bullets on point-blank range while preparing to kick the shit out of this guy. Red Skull on the other hand is preparing to open a portal using the Tesseract. Now in the next scene we get a nod to Avengers 1 where Tony Stark and Steve Rogers had this conversation.
We need a plan of attack!
I have a plan. Attack.
But in this timeline, the roles are pretty much reversed.
Should we not have a plan?
Who needs a plan? I have a shield.
A shield is not a plan!
This giant creature starts coming out of this portal, and the first thing it crushes is Red Skull himself. Bucky and the team find Steve Rogers alive and sound. Peggy then realizes the tentacles of this creature are growing by the second, so they must stop it now. She takes Howard closer to the machine.
Come on, speak to me, baby!
Does it remind you of anything?
Hello, dear. Tell me everything.
Like father, like son, eh? Howard then pulls this lever to close the portal. What's interesting here is that it literally says close in German on top of the lever.
Hedy Lamarr and I spent a weekend together, but she wasn't teaching me German!
So the fact that Howard made a joke of not knowing German isn't just a filler joke anymore. The animators adding actual German text on the machine added value to this joke. You gotta love this writer-animator combination. Steve then manages to rescue Bucky and the rest of the team, but sadly he couldn't save Peggy Carter, as she's the one making the sacrifice this time. But of course she doesn't die and teleports to the future, where Nick Fury and Hawkeye were experimenting with the Tesseract for Project Pegasus. Samuel L. Jackson and Jeremy Renner both returned to play their beloved characters, and it looks as if Peggy Carter teleported to the future just days before Loki's arrival in 2012. So even though she just dealt with Red Skull and a big giant monster, there's another one coming who is essentially more dangerous. And notice how Nick Fury tells Peggy to put down the sword.
Ma'am, please put down the sword.
Now in our timeline, Nick Fury said something similar as well.
Sir, please put down the spear.
If you think about it, because of Peggy's Nexus event, this timeline now doesn't have Bucky as the Winter Soldier, meaning Howard Stark and his wife won't be murdered by Bucky, so Civil War wouldn't take place in this timeline. I mean, the infinite amount of possibilities is just heaven on earth for writers. They can now play around characters however they want, and the more unique and weird it is, the better. Now I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of What If Episode 1. Considering it's an animated show, I really feel it has tremendous potential. I can't wait to see evil Doctor Strange, Spider-Man Supreme, zombie versions of Iron Man and Captain America. I mean, the possibilities are endless. As for me, I do not, cannot, and will not stop finding hidden details in these episodes. So please give me a thumbs up, grab the subscribe button, and turn notifications on. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter to get updates about my videos. Till then, I'm Kevin Hart, and I'll see you lads in the next one.